Alex, congratulations.
Thank you.
How does it feel to be standing here, having just defeated the defending champion on centre court?
There is a moment in every young athlete's career when the whole world finally turns to look at them, and for Alex Eala, that moment arrived on centre court at Wimbledon, in front of Roger Federer and Billie Jean King, with a nation of over 100 million people watching every bounce of the ball. She had already done the impossible 2 days earlier. She had beaten the defending champion. And then, on a Monday evening in July, that fairy tale ran into a wall named Jasmine Paolini, and the dream ended 4-6, 6-4, 3-6. But if you think this story is simply about a loss, you are missing the part that actually matters, because what happened between Saturday and Monday says more about what it takes to become a champion than the scoreline ever could. Let's rewind to where this all began, because you cannot understand the ending without understanding the mountain Eala had just climbed. 3 days before she ever stepped out to face Paolini, the 21-year-old from the Philippines walked onto center court and produced the single greatest win of her career, defeating Iga Świątek, the reigning Wimbledon champion, in a match that instantly became the biggest story of the tournament. It wasn't a fluke and it wasn't a fortunate bounce. It was a complete performance against one of the best players in the world, delivered on the sport's most famous stage. For a player who had never before been past the third round of a Grand Slam, this was an earthquake. It rewired what people believed was possible for her, and it rewired what she believed was possible for herself. Winning that match meant Eala arrived at her fourth-round meeting with Paolini carrying something she had never carried before, the weight of being a favorite, of being the story everyone wanted to keep believing in. Back home, this was already historic. No Filipino player had ever reached this deep into a Grand Slam in the Open era. She had already surpassed marks set by Philippine tennis legends from the amateur era decades earlier. Whatever happened next, she had rewritten her country's tennis history. But history doesn't ease the nerves when you're standing at the baseline 2 days after the biggest win of your life, staring across the net at a former world number 4 who has been through this exact kind of pressure before. That's the part worth sitting with for a second, because Jasmine Paolini is not some anonymous name who got in the way of a fairy tale. She is a 2-time Grand Slam finalist, having reached the championship match at both the French Open and Wimbledon in the same season not long before this one. She has lived on the biggest courts in the world and she has felt the specific kind of pressure that comes with being one match away from history. Eala was feeling that pressure for the first time in her life. Paolini had felt it before and knew how to sit inside it without flinching. The match itself was tight from the very first game, and it stayed tight all the way to the final point. Paolini broke serve early to take a foothold in the first set, and even though Eala clawed her way back to level things up, the Italian found the break she needed late in the set to close it out. Down a set, Eala did something that should not be overlooked in any honest account of this match: she rebuilt herself. She came out for the second set and played with total conviction, breaking Paolini's serve, trading blows, saving breakpoints of her own, and eventually leveling the match at 1 set apiece. For those 2 sets, this was as even a contest as you will find in the second week of a Grand Slam. It was the third set where the difference finally showed itself, and it showed itself in the smallest possible margins. Both players held their opening service games. The set stayed on serve deep into the frame, tight and tense, neither player giving an inch. Then, in the 8th game, with the set still up for grabs, Paolini earned her chance and Eala handed her the opening she needed. A double fault at the wrong moment, followed by an unforced error, gave Paolini the break that put her on the doorstep of victory. Eala tried to answer immediately, winning the next 2 points as she searched for a way back into the game, but a string of errors in the final exchanges sealed it. Paolini served out the match, and just like that, one of the most talked about runs in recent Wimbledon history came to an end. What makes this loss so fascinating is not that Eala was overwhelmed. She wasn't. Anyone who watched that match saw 2 players going toe-to-toe for over 2 hours, with the outcome undecided until the very last few games. This is exactly what Eala herself pointed to when she sat down in the press conference afterward, and her own words tell you more about what happened than any outside analysis could. She said it came down to details, very fine details, the kind of margins that decide matches when 2 players are this closely matched. She talked about the fact that in tennis, especially in matches this tight, it can come down to 1 point here or there, and what matters most is how you manage yourself in those specific moments. She was also refreshingly honest about her own performance, saying plainly that her serve simply wasn't as sharp as it had been in other matches during the tournament, and that this happens, that no player performs at their peak every single time they step on court. There was no excuse making in how she talked about it, no blaming the occasion or the crowd or the stage. She said Paolini played great tennis, that the Italian went for her shots and made her uncomfortable at key moments, and that this is simply part of competing at the top level of the sport. That kind of self-assessment, delivered just minutes after the biggest disappointment of her career, tells you a great deal about the maturity underneath the youthful exterior. There's also a physical detail worth mentioning honestly, because it did come up around the tournament. Eala had tape on her forearm and had previously described taping on her leg as a preventive measure rather than a response to any specific injury. Whether fatigue played any role after the emotional and physical demands of beating a defending champion just 2 days earlier is something only she can really speak to, and she herself acknowledged there had been emotions to manage in the days following that win, calling it part of the professionalism required to bounce back and compete again so soon. That is a fair and honest way to think about what happened, without inventing statistics or dramatizing a mental collapse that the match itself doesn't support. Remember, she won an entire set against a 2-time Grand Slam finalist just 2 days after the emotional high of her career. Now here's where the story turns from disappointment into something genuinely inspiring, because what Eala walked away with from this tournament goes far beyond a single result. She became the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the 4th round of Wimbledon, surpassing marks set by Philippine tennis pioneers from generations earlier. Her run through the tournament included wins over players she had faced in previous tour matches, and it culminated in that stunning victory over the defending champion that will be remembered as one of the signature upsets of the entire championships. Financially, reaching the 4th round meant a substantial payday, with players eliminated at that stage earning £300,000, somewhere in the range of $400,000, a reflection of just how far she had traveled through the draw. Her ranking is set to climb as a result, with projections putting her at a new career-high position in the world rankings once the tour updates its standings. What stands out most, though, is not the money or the ranking points. It's the way she talked about what comes next. Rather than dwelling on the defeat, Eala spoke with genuine belief about carrying this experience forward, framing the tournament as proof of how far she has come rather than a ceiling she has hit. She talked about trusting her own preparation, about the confidence that comes from knowing she can compete with, and beat, some of the very best players walking the tour today. This season alone, she has picked up wins over top 10 level opponents and a defending Grand Slam champion, numbers that put her win record against elite competition in territory very few 21-year-olds ever reach. There is also something worth saying about Paolini here, because giving her credit doesn't take anything away from Eala's story, it actually completes it. Paolini arrived at this tournament in the middle of a difficult season, dealing with fitness setbacks that disrupted her grass court preparation heading into the championships. She had to fight her way through early rounds before finding her rhythm, and by the time she met Eala in the 4th round, she was playing with the composure of someone who has already been to 2 Grand Slam finals and knows exactly what it takes to survive the tightest moments. That experience, more than any single tactical flaw or missed opportunity, is often what separates a player in their first deep Grand Slam run from a player who has already lived through several of them. Paolini went on to the quarterfinals to continue her own run, a reminder that this was a genuinely elite level of competition on both sides of the net, not a mismatch that Eala allowed to slip away. So what is the real reason Alex Eala didn't win this match? It isn't one dramatic flaw, and it isn't a mental collapse. It's the same explanation she gave herself, honestly and without any spin, an incredibly tight match against a proven, battle-tested competitor, decided by a handful of key points, on a day when her game wasn't quite as sharp as it had been just 2 days before against Świątek. That's not a tragedy. That's what competing at the very top of tennis actually looks like, especially for a 21-year-old experiencing this stage of a Grand Slam for the very first time. Losses like this one are often the ones that end up meaning the most, not because they feel good in the moment, but because of what they prove. Eala proved she belongs in the same conversation as 2-time Grand Slam finalists. She proved she can take a set off a player with that level of experience in the biggest moments of a major tournament. She proved that beating a defending champion at Wimbledon wasn't a one-off miracle but a genuine reflection of her level right now. The gap between her and the very best in the world isn't some distant, theoretical thing anymore. It's a handful of points in a deciding set, and that is an enormously encouraging place for a player still this early in her career to find herself. As she heads toward the hard-court swing later this summer, the story here isn't really about what went wrong at Wimbledon. It's about a young player who just showed the entire tennis world, and more importantly showed herself, exactly how close she already is. The history she made in reaching this stage will stand no matter what comes next, and if this tournament is any indication of her trajectory, this almost certainly will not be the last time we see her deep into the second week of a Grand Slam, standing across the net from the very best players in the world, and giving them everything they can handle. So here's the real question worth asking. Does this loss end up as a footnote in the story of how Alex Eala became a Grand Slam champion, or was this the closest she gets to the mountaintop? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you think her career goes from here.